This week, for the first time since World War II, Germany's Christian Democrats allowed the far-right AfD to decide the outcome of a vote in parliament. Pundits are calling it the end of Germany's firewall against fascism. Thousands of people are protesting across the country, and former Chancellor Angela Merkel, who never comments on day-to-day politics, broke her silence to warn against what her own successor is doing. Has anyone checked in on German politics lately? Let's talk about what's going on.
Welcome to Catch the Eye Politics, where we explain how European politics works in practice.
It's been a tumultuous week in Germany, and one that could shape the future of the country. To understand what's going on, we have to go back to January 22nd, when a mentally ill man attacked a group of children with a knife in a public park in Aschaffenburg, Bavaria. The man stabbed and killed a 2-year-old child as well as a 41-year-old man who had tried to stop him, and wounded 3 other people. The perpetrator was a 28-year-old man who came to Germany from Afghanistan in 2022. He had a history of violent crime and was under psychiatric treatment. And he was supposed to have left the country. There's a lot more to say about how this terrible attack happened and what could have been done by federal and state authorities to prevent it. But in this video, I want to focus on the political fallout. As you can imagine, the tragedy reignited fierce debates over immigration and security, especially with Germany in the middle of an election campaign. After the government fell apart in November, federal elections were scheduled for February 23rd. So, of course, the political opposition used this chance to renew its proposals for how to crack down on immigration going forward. But there was one thing that had always been taboo: working with the far-right AfD, the so-called Alternative for Germany. For years, Germany's political parties had vowed not to cooperate with anti-democratic forces, no matter what. This strategy is often called the Brandmauer, or Firewall. The idea was to stand together and defend German democracy from a party that is under investigation for being a suspected extremist organization by Germany's domestic intelligence agency. I mean, even Marine Le Pen from France's far-right National Rally stopped working with the AfD after its lead candidate in last year's EU election, Maximilian Krah, called the Nazis' murderous gas chambers a detail of history. And yet, this week marks the first time ever that the AfD was allowed to decide the outcome of a vote in the Bundestag, Germany's federal parliament. Many commentators, and even the AfD itself, called this the end of the firewall. And it has caused a veritable political earthquake that could even change the outcome of next month's election. But how did we get here? Germany's coalition government collapsed back in November, when the neoliberal Free Democrats provoked their partners to kick them out. Suddenly, the remaining government parties, the center-left Social Democrats and Greens, no longer had a majority in parliament. Knowing this, the biggest opposition party, the conservative Christian Democrats, renewed their commitment to the firewall, even and especially during the election campaign. Friedrich Merz, the Christian Democratic leader and the current frontrunner in the race for German Chancellor, was very explicit about this when he made a proposition to the Social Democrats and the Greens. Let me quote him directly.
"We should agree that we only put decisions on the agenda of the plenary that we have previously agreed on with you from the Social Democrats and the Greens, so that neither when determining the agenda nor during votes on any matters in this House will there ever be a random or deliberate majority involving those over there from the AfD. I would like to expressly propose this agreement to you, ladies and gentlemen, because that's exactly what these ladies and gentlemen on the far right would like, to suddenly be able to form majorities, even with you, from the 2 minority factions when determining the agenda. We don't want that."
I don't know about you, but as far as politicians go, that's pretty clear language to me. And yet, what happened this week is the exact opposite of what Friedrich Merz promised. In a press conference on the day after the attack in Aschaffenburg, Merz presented a 5-point plan on immigration and signaled that the firewall was not going to stop him from getting it passed.
"I am completely indifferent to who will join me on this path politically. I'm just saying I am not taking any other path. And anyone who wants to walk it with me will have to adhere to these 5 points. Compromises are no longer possible here.
The following day, his right-hand man, Carsten Linnemann, said that
all this talk about the firewall
needed to stop. Merz himself also doubled down and said that the Christian Democrats would introduce a resolution in parliament, regardless of who supported it. Commentators immediately began speculating about what all of this meant. Were the Christian Democrats really about to tear down the firewall? For a moment, it looked like Merz might still turn things around. Included in the text of his resolution, there was an unexpected twist: a direct attack on the AfD.
The AfD exploits the problems, worries, and fears that have arisen from mass illegal immigration to stir up xenophobia and spread conspiracy theories. They want Germany to exit the EU and the Euro and instead turn to Putin's Eurasian Economic Union. All of this threatens Germany's stability, security, and prosperity. That is why this party is not a partner, but instead our political opponent.
According to the German weekly Der Spiegel, this gambit was meant to prevent the AfD from supporting the resolution and entice the Social Democrats and Greens to vote in favor. But Merz's plan backfired. On the one hand, it quickly became clear that the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the left would vote against Merz's resolution. And it's easy to explain why. Not only does the 5-point plan go against their political convictions, legal experts also believe that it goes against the German constitution and against EU law. On the other hand, the AfD announced that it would support the resolution, despite Merz's attack against them. After all, what better way to prove to voters that the AfD will truly do anything to fight immigration? And as a counterattack, the AfD threatened to reintroduce an anti-immigration law that the Christian Democrats had tried to pass right before the government collapsed. This was painful for Merz, because it's one thing to pass a non-binding resolution with the help of the AfD, but it's another thing to pass an actual law together. Still, Merz decided to run with it, and the Christian Democrats put his resolution on the agenda for Wednesday and their law for Friday. Merz said that even though he was already dreading the images of the AfD celebrating their victory, he'd rather
do what's necessary than stand by and watch more people get threatened, injured, or killed.
I personally think this is a questionable argument, since it's unlikely that these measures would have prevented the attack in Aschaffenburg. But you can make up your own mind. All that said, the Christian Democrats and the AfD do not hold a majority in parliament together, so the outcome of the vote was uncertain until the results came in on Wednesday evening. In the end, Merz's resolution passed by a whisker, with 348 votes in favor, 344 votes against, and 10 abstentions. Without support from the Free Democrats and toleration from the populist BSW, it actually would have failed. But despite the heavy criticism and public protests against collaborating with the AfD, only one member of the Christian Democrats, Antje Tillmann, voted against the resolution, and that might well be because she's not running for re-election. I think what's most telling about this whole ordeal is how the parliamentarians reacted to the announcement of the results. The only group that cheered and applauded was the AfD, which makes sense because they're probably the only ones who will benefit. The next day, the Christian Democrats woke up with quite the political hangover. Most journalists and pundits had condemned Merz's move. There were countless spontaneous protests. Holocaust survivor Albrecht Weinberg gave back his Order of Merit. Former CDU politician Michel Friedmann publicly left the party, and 2 state-level leaders from the CDU said that they would block their own party's anti-immigration law in the Bundesrat if it passed with the AfD's help. And here's the kicker. Even former CDU Chancellor Angela Merkel herself came out of the woodwork to give her 2 cents, which she usually never does. And for anyone who knows her, her press release is brutal. She starts by quoting Friedrich Merz's pledge to uphold the firewall that I discussed earlier, calling it, quote,
an expression of great political responsibility.
She goes on,
I believe that it is a mistake not to feel bound by this proposal any longer.
This may not sound like much to untrained ears, but remember that we're talking about Angela Merkel here. Jokes aside, something like this can cost you an election. All that to pass one non-binding resolution? And the week wasn't even over yet. The Bundestag still had to vote on the CDU's anti-immigration law, and once again, the outcome was uncertain up until the last moment. When the time came to debate the proposal on Friday, it took hours to even decide on the procedure. Social Democrats and Greens wanted to postpone the vote, but this was voted down. Finally, after hours of negotiations and delays, the vote was held, resulting in 338 votes in favor, 349 against, and 5 abstentions. The proposal had failed, but only because a lot of members of the Christian Democrats and Free Democrats had skipped the vote. At this point, you might be wondering, does it really matter if the Christian Democrats rely on votes from the AfD to pass their own proposals? The answer is yes, because it sets a political precedent. Never before has a far-right party been given the chance to decide the outcome of a vote in the German Bundestag. This is a can of worms that the other parties wanted to keep shut for a reason. Just think of the immediate effect it had. The AfD was able to force Merz's hand by threatening to reintroduce one of the Christian Democrats' own legal proposals. How embarrassing. Is that really a position you want to put yourself in? And now that the seal is broken, it's only a matter of time before similar initiatives pop up on the state level, especially in East Germany, where local CDU branches have been flirting with the idea of a black and blue coalition for a while now. Vienna calling. As I said at the outset, it's been a tumultuous week in German politics. We will only know the full implications over the coming weeks, and maybe even years. And come February 23rd, voters may punish the conservatives or reward them. But it's also unclear how the democratic parties, who fought so passionately with each other this week, are supposed to return to normal after the elections. Friedrich Merz is blaming the Social Democrats and Greens for forcing him to rely on votes from the AfD. But he will probably need at least one of them to form a government. And what if the AfD's influence continues to grow? If this whole thing still doesn't sound like a big deal to you, don't be so sure of yourself. Beware of the beginnings has become a German proverb for a reason. We know from our own history that democracy doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes slowly, one precedent at a time. It's how Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933. The Nazi Party only got 33% of the vote, but Hitler was enabled and underestimated by the Conservative Party at the time. They gave him a seat at the table, thinking that they could weaken the Nazis by collaborating with them. At the center of this tragic miscalculation was Franz von Papen, a conservative politician some people are now comparing to Friedrich Merz. And the rest is history.
That's it for this video. Please hit like if you liked it, subscribe if you want more, and leave a comment below if you've got some thoughts to share. And as always, keep your eyes open.